At 6:06, and I'd like to acknowledge and recognize that tonight's meeting is being held on the traditional territory of the Snuneymuxw people. Are there any additions or deletions to tonight's agenda? Any changes in order? Seeing none, I will ask for a motion to approve the agenda, please. Trustee Higginson, and I need a seconder. Trustee Wilkinson. No discussion, all in favor? All right, carried. I would like a motion to approve the minutes from February 19th, please. Trustee Keller, Trustee Wilkinson, all in favor? There we go. All right, we have no presentations under number 7 tonight. We have a couple of senior staff reports, starting with Mr. Sabo, pardon me, on AFG.
Thank you. Through the chair, tonight we'd like to present the 1920 AFG budget for the board resolution. And for Mr. Ross, the facilities planning manager with me tonight. The majority of this is his work and his department's work. So I want to turn the meeting over to him, and I'll be available to help with questions.
Steve mentioned, my name is Mike Ross. I'm the facilities planning manager. I'd like to present to you our plan for 1920 AFG. I did send out some information with the information sheet in the agenda last Friday. I hope you've all had a chance to look at it. Feel free to jump in at any time for questions, and also you can hold your questions to the end if you like. I threw together some information just to give some of you new trustees some detail on what AFG is all about, how the ministry funds it, how it's reported. So it's a grant paid to the boards of education to fund projects requested to maintain and prevent premature deterioration of district assets. It's broken up into 12 categories of eligible grant expenditures. So roof replacements, mechanical system upgrades, electrical system upgrades, facility upgrades. Those can be anything from painting, exterior envelope work, loss prevention. The big one there is fire alarm systems and fire protection. Functional improvements, that's alterations to the school to enhance the functionality for educational purposes. Technology infrastructure upgrades. Site upgrades, that's to do with the actual school site, playgrounds, parking, pedestrian access. Disabled access, those are improvements to enhance the accessibility for students, staff, parents, the public. Asbestos abatement. This one is actually for target abatement projects. We typically don't do that. Abatement is always a part of some of the projects work that we do in the facility upgrade and functional improvements. There's always an abatement component. Health and safety upgrades and site servicing. I'll give you a little history on what we did last year at AFG, and then we'll move into this year's proposal. We had a budget of $2.65 million. During the year, we did have a continuous intake of project requests from schools and from our maintenance department. We did look to increase alignment with other programs, other funding sources, local capital, major capital projects. We had increased flexibility to address emergent items, and we increased pre-planning for projects requiring design time. So last year we replaced roofs at Barsby, Seaview, Park Avenue, Departure Bay, and a section of gutter at Dover. Facility upgrades included exterior painting at Fairview, Ladysmith, Secondary. We did an annual flooring replacement program. Cedar, the DAC at Forest Park. You can see the schools listed there. We did facility upgrades. We upgraded a room at NDSS to make it compliant with health standards to use as a ceramics room. Some space alterations at Connect Ed as a Cedar Secondary. We finished off the conversion to a secondary by reinstating the weight room. And at Coltai, we replaced some deteriorating millwork. These are just a few of the projects. We did more, but these are some of the key ones. Electrical system, the annual SEMP program, we did lighting upgrades at 11 schools and 2 district facility buildings. Fire alarm upgrade at Connected and Gabriola. Technology infrastructure upgrades. PA at Bayview and Forest Park, Randerson Ridge. We completed some refrigerated fill stations at schools that weren't part of the lead in the water. So at Cinnabar, Coltai, Franknay, McGurr, and Randerson Ridge, those schools were not old enough, but they didn't have those filling stations, so we used AFG to make sure every school had one. We did some safety upgrades at Brecken by enclosing the enclosed play area. We were getting some transients spending their evenings there, so they can't get in anymore. So wrapping up this year's AFG, we're still closing out the SEMP and IS projects. There's some miscellaneous carpet and electrical work that's outstanding with a few PAs and BEP projects. And we're finishing up some design work that we've commissioned for advanced planning for this year. And obviously there's the budget wrap up and reconciliation at the end. So moving into this year's AFG, this is some information on the consultation process that we went through. So last fall, we had an intake from schools. We solicited input from schools at updated lists. And also meeting with facility staff in the fall to refine our own internal lists. We know our buildings quite well, and we rely on our staff to sort of give us an idea of what the urgent issues are, the things that we don't necessarily talk about every day, but the things that are on the books. We have a district master list that's comprised of 780 some projects at the moment. So we're constantly refining that and bringing the priority projects to the top of the heap. We also have annual renewal programs for roofing, flooring, exterior paint. So those get a budget in each AFG that we can assign work to. And also the work order system. There's many work orders that come in throughout the year that under various categories, and we do review those on a monthly basis to make sure that we're capturing all the capital requests in there. So this is the schedule, so how the AFG development came about. So December and January, this is where we began to develop a district-wide 5-year plan for each school and facility. So this is a snapshot of everything that we plan to do and are hoping to do within the next 5 years. And that includes all the major capital projects. We've included seismic, we've included the roofing program, we've included flooring. Everything that we're aware of at each facility has gone into our 5-year plan. And we did go backwards a bit up until about 2016. We included all the work that we had done without going too far back. So in January, where was an ongoing refinement, because the list does get quite long, we need to narrow it down and focus on priority. Pete took a draft AFG list to the alt group in early February that was vetted, and then Pete and I also took it to DLT, and now we're here today. So this is these are the 12 categories that I spoke about earlier, and this is the budget allotments for each of the programs. I'll go into each category in detail in the following slides, but this is gives you an idea of the percentage of the budget allotted. It also includes the contingency and within those percentages. So roof replacements the next sections of roofs are for, this isn't the whole school, these will be sections of the schools. So there's a section of roof at Cedar Elementary, at Woodlands. We have 4 portables that are overdue for roof replacement. And we have that makes up about 75% of our budget. When we tender out the roofs, we always put in options that we can select 1 or 2 or 3, depending on how the pricing comes in, so we can maximize our budget.
So are you ready, Mr. Fair? Did you have a question?
It'll be on the next one.
Okay, thank you.
So that's our roofing program. Facility and site upgrades, continuation of the exterior painting program. We didn't finish Ladysmith last year, so that one stays in the secondary. Ladysmith primary is a more extensive project because there's a lot of siding replacement that has to go along with that before they paint. So, and we're going to tender Pauline Hare and Bayview.
That becomes my question. For the last few years, they've been tendering out schools, and normally they end up costing double for what they can do internally. And part of that was for decisions that were made that we dismantled part of the painting program. And, you know, money being spent well, we've already showed that to the previous trustees about cost. And, you know, to see it out there again as tendering, and I'm not sure where the money's allocated because I couldn't see it in the breakdown. So I'm not sure where they would pull the funding for those painting projects based on what they showed in the AFG breakdown. So I'm cautionary about why we would spend more than double if we can do it internally for less.
Flooring replacement, we typically target around, we earmark about $100,000 to do flooring replacement. A lot of those projects include abatement work because of the age of the buildings, and that project, that also gets tendered in portions, so we have some flexibility on how much work we can accomplish over a period, as well as budgetary considerations. There's a universal washroom renewal project planned for Pauline Hare, McGurr. This is an old computer lab, room 114, that was converted without HVAC considerations, so we're going to go in and fix the air quality and comfort. Pleasant Valley Gym floor replacement. It's the last Tarkett floor in the district, so it's been on the list since I've started 3 years ago. So, Randerson Ridge, we're moving towards dealing with some of the playfield drainage design. That field is unusable from October to a little April due to just the saturation, so we're going to work towards a design to fix that. That's a design only. We won't be doing any work this summer. Perimeter drainage. We've had about 8 to 10 schools have flooding issues due to failing perimeter drains. So we're bundling up a project to go and do some investigation, and from that investigation, we'll target some of the more urgent locations, as well as come up with a plan to deal with them as a whole.
One question that perhaps a follow-up, pardon my ignorance. What is universal washroom mean?
That's an everyone washroom.
Gender neutral. So is it a gender neutral washroom?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, good. I mean,
Sorry.
I was going to say, if we're renewing a washroom, can we do it with the eye to the making it a gender neutral, you know, where? So, there we go, thank you.
And I'll follow up actually, and they're also then wheelchair accessible, aren't they?
Yeah, it's universal, yeah.
Yeah, that's what they mean.
So some of the terminology gets
Yeah.
a little skewed, but yes.
Yeah.
Evolving.
Sorry. Continuing with facility and site upgrades, Cinnabar, we have a plan to build a portable pad to accept the next 3 portable classrooms. So we're planning on building that this summer. McGurr has had an issue in their parking lot, so we've got a plan to address that. Quarterway, the portables are fed by almost a redundant water line from Bowen Road. That's on a separate meter, and it's failing, it's leaking. So we've got a plan to tie that into the school, get it back onto the 1 metering system, and deal with the leak. At Cedar, there's been a request to move some play equipment and consolidate at the rear of the school with the intermediate play, and this would also free up space for the future portable on site. So there's no portable planned there right now, but thinking ahead, this would clear the way for another one to go in, should there be a need. The technology and infrastructure upgrades, so there's an annual IS program, that's cabling and infrastructure upgrades managed through Andy's department, and our electricians do that work. And the PA system at Departure Bay. Functional improvements. So there's at Ladysmith and Cedar, there's been a request to do some planning to convert some space in the school to accommodate some new programs with metalwork and auto. So we're going to do some advanced planning work there so we can at least come up with a plan and more accurate budgets moving forward. Pleasant Valley, we're going to do some planning this year. There's some space deficits at that school based on ministry standards when it comes to administration and special ed. So we'll do some preliminary planning, and so we can put a project together for next year's AFG. And space projects. This is to complete all the computer lab conversions that we didn't get to this year. So there's 5 on the list. 4 computer labs and some work at Ladysmith the Intermediate to move the zone office folks. Electrical upgrades. The bulk of this work is our strategic energy management plan. So 11 schools are targeted for this year. Exterior lighting in some, interior relamping and controls work. Departure Bay is getting a panel upgrade. And Solaire has a failing intruder alarm system that we're going to replace this year. Into loss prevention, we're going to replace the fire alarm at Barsby. And mechanical, the UV water treatment system at Gabriola is failing and needs attention. Disabled access. The Frank Ney new addition is pre-wired for openers. There just aren't any, so we're going to put openers in. Departure Bay, the latest portables going in are on the lower playfield, and there's no accessible route to get up there. So we're coming up with a plan to put in some stairs and a compliant ramp to get students and staff up to those portables, because there's a second one going in. Cedar Elementary, there's no accessible route from the band shell to the rest of the school, so that's on the books to look at this year. And George Avenue, from George Avenue to the school site is a fairly heavily used route. It's also the preferred path for Strong Start folks, and it's a bit treacherous, so we've got to come up with a plan. We have a plan in place to address that. Health and safety, Kotai, there's an irrigation system that's exposed during heavy rain, and it's a tripping hazard for kids, so we need to remediate. Quarterway portables have an enclosed area that's becoming popular with transients, so we've got a plan to enclose that. At Cedar Elementary, they're using the rear parking lot by the annex for staff. It's just a one-way fire lane, so we're going to widen that and pave to create additional parking and to make it a little safer for students and staff. John Barsby, we have a plan to introduce some signage and speed control to the student drop-off area in the roundabout and some signage.
I have a question actually,
Yep.
and this is for you or Mr. Sabo.
And because a parent asked me this, and I've been meaning to find out for ages. Under disabled access, what kind of a process? What is the process for like determining the priorities? Like I know someone I ran into said to me, for example, a school like Seaview, when I go into Seaview, I can't go in the front door. And, so what makes some of these things a priority over, say, addressing that kind of a situation? Or is it less about priorities and more about what's feasible financially and physically, or like what, is my question making sense? Yeah.
Yeah, through the chair, maybe I can get started and Mike can jump in on some of the more recent work. In the past, the ministry had funding known as minor capital, where the district could apply for certain things, and under that category was handicap accessibility. And when that program was available, it was additional to AFG. We achieved quite a number of, I'll call them speculative upgrades to schools. So sort of the deficiencies in schools that are there but aren't pressured by a student attending to do upgrades. So we did a number of elevators and handicap accessible washrooms on second floors, et cetera, to help improve the situations at schools. The ministry discontinued that funding, and that program became unavailable to us, and the SEP program was introduced a number of years later. The district has been addressing handicap accessibility needs on a demand basis now.
Okay.
So we work closely with Mr. Eslinger's department and staff to attempt to prioritize and address the highest needs. And we're continuing to discuss how we can better streamline the funding mechanisms so that handicap accessibility requests don't compete with other priorities.
Right.
Because it's difficult to, essentially they win every time.
Yeah.
So then all of our funding could be directed into one area. So there's a balance there we've yet to 100% achieve, but we believe we're addressing the worst cases and continuing to try and find better ways.
Yeah, as do I. I just was wanting to be clear on the process. Yeah.
And just to jump in, Mike might have added, we have a detailed process now, an actual detailed step-by-step process of when an item is brought forward, how we communicate with Mr. Eslinger's office to make sure that the requests stay valid and follow a process so we can take them to resolution.
Thank you.
And the last, health and safety, we're going to do some work over on the north side of the DAC with sidewalks and crosswalk to get people safely across over to the parking lot and out to Wakasai Avenue. So alignment efforts. So in addition to AFG, we also have approved local capital projects in the value of about $930,000. Those are some new portables, a portable move, a couple of more computer labs at Georgia and Mountain View. School-funded projects. Those get attention from us as well, and at a different varying. I don't know the right term, but we have to provide some time in our resourcing to address school-funded projects.
Maybe I should just try and talk a little bit about school-funded projects. So while the district attempts to do long-range planning, we often get requests from schools because they have an initiative that they would like to achieve. So the facilities department, learning services, they have to weave those in somehow and to try and assist PAC groups in achieving their goals in a timely manner. It's difficult to ask PAC groups and school-funded projects and school-initiated projects to sit in the queue as long as some of these other 780 projects have. So we're trying to streamline the mechanism to better address them in a timely manner. And some funding was set aside in the operating budget last year to do that. And we've managed to clear a significant amount of backlogged school-initiated projects. And we're hoping that we can do the same next year.
And that also aligns with our 5-year plan for each school, and each school can then prioritize their own requests within that 5-year plan to give us a little better idea of what's coming.
Question for you, Becky.
Could I just ask a question? You briefly mentioned that there were some portables that were on the books for next year. Have you released where those are going?
Yeah, there's a portable going to McGurr from Park Avenue. And then we're purchasing 3 new ones, one for Departure Bay, one for Uplands, and one for Pleasant Valley. And I just
So
get it wrong.
Thank you, Mike. I'd like to add a little bit of information. So staff have done a significant amount of work to consider both where schools are at a space deficit and where schools are expecting growth. And so those 4 schools were in a space deficit situation, meaning that we had one more classroom than what ministry capacity says we should be able to hold. So we're holding one more division. For instance, if the school has 10 rooms by ministry definition, by ministry capacity, we would have had 11 divisions in that school. And we can accomplish that because we've made alterations to schools to be flexible so that we can squeeze another division in. Those 4 schools then will be returned to space standard, And they were identified as schools we'd like to address earlier because they also show growth potential at those schools.
Trustee, question?
Thank you, through the chair. So just going back a few slides in relation to our information system of technology and our what seems to be a fairly insignificant proportion of the budget at 2%. And with the conversion of computer labs, do we enhance the technology through portable systems? Does that money come from this fund as well?
No, AFG doesn't fund equipment, so this is just the alterations to the physical space.
Okay.
So in a sense, we're decommissioning computer labs.
Right, so, but is there a plan in place to make up for that technology access through some other funding mechanism?
Mr.
Yes.
Hill?
No, I was just going to refer.
Mr. Saywell?
Yeah, I was going to ask Learning Services. Mr. Davey, would you like to respond to that about computer labs?
Computer lab conversions?
Quite specifically, sorry, Mr. Davey,
Yeah.
I know we've worked together quite a bit on it. We were discussing that the AFG covers the conversion of the lab.
Right.
But the replacement technology for when the fixed lab is no longer available, the measures taken to provide the mobile technology.
So the funding, through the chair, the funding of the computers is generally Chromebooks or iPads is coming through the Information Services Department as part of their computer replacement program.
So any of the technology would fall under Andy's budget, our Director of Information Technology, and we have a student-to-device ratio, and so any decommissioned computer lab we would typically put in, depending on the grade level, Chromebooks or iPad carts in classrooms. So all of that technology would fall under that plan, and it's typically done through a transfer from local capital.
Do you have a follow-up?
Or from operating.
If I may, through
Yeah.
the chair, just one quick follow-up. So when we plan for computer lab decommissioning and part of our facilities program, do we have a parallel budget attached to that for mobile technology, or does that have to come through a separate process? Is it a given that we're going to meet those ratios, I guess, or is that something that we have to coordinate between departments?
I'll respond in perhaps a limited way. I believe if Director Canty was here, he could respond in a more detailed way. We do coordinate with the IT department. I understand that they do have budgets available to coordinate that work and match up the technology. And the IT department is well aware, and it's part of the approval process for a computer lab conversion, that the other departments are aware of what's going on and agree and can make those alignment plans so that it's a smooth transition at the school level.
Trustee Higginson?
Bit of a rabbit hole, but I'm going down it. So, just in terms of, moving to more mobile technology, issues with converting the computer labs to, learning spaces aside, I think, we've made decisions around the table in budget to make that move because it's good learning. It's a better learning environment for students to have technology embedded into their daily learning experience rather than having to line up, go down the hall, line up, turn on the computer, log in. It just makes way more sense. So it happens to coincide that we are lucky enough to be able to do that, but it's coinciding with this space issue that we're currently having as well. But
most of the schools would likely already have iPad carts and more mobile technology in the school before the decommissioning of the computer lab.
One more follow-up for you.
Thanks. Thank you. I
That's it.
agree with Trustee Higginson. I guess where I was trying to, maybe I didn't phrase this very well. In terms of ongoing maintenance and upgrades of our IT infrastructure, does the conversion of computer labs take away from that money, or is that an addition?
They're separate.
I'll answer that.
Yeah.
No, it doesn't take the separate budgets,
Yeah.
doesn't take away from that money. Good question. We're at 2.5 students per computer, and that's what we were aiming for. So there may be a situation where we decommission a lab of really old computers, frankly, that have typing programs on them and other things that, not that useful. And we've closed the labs to create space because we don't have any other option, number one. And we're at a good student device ratio anyways, typically.
Trustee McKay.
Thank you. Through the chair, I would just add to that really computer labs, if they are operating currently, they're extras. The Google Chromebooks and the iPads that are in the schools are what is the ratio that we use. Anything that's in a computer lab and still working right now is a bonus.
Okay. I'm going to suggest that we let you move on to complete the presentation.
Okay, and Lyman efforts along with Trustee Broser's questions about accessibility projects, that's an ongoing prioritization and resource allocation. Ministry capital, just a quick rundown of what we've got planned. SEP, so the Park Avenue HVAC Phase 1 and Phase 2 is in design right now. HVAC upgrade Phase 2 at Hammond Bay is going to be done this summer. And also the Cinnabar second phase of a recent boiler upgrade is to do the controls work, the DDC system. Playground enhancement program, there's a playground expansion going at Georgia Avenue. Pete is working on the Hammond Bay expansion, PDR, and also developing our 5-year capital plan submission, which is due the end of June. And we're also working at Dover Bay, updating the building envelope condition assessment. That's underway. And there's talk that if BC Housing have the money, that might be a summer project. That would be a quick turnaround. That's just moving into 2021. Looking next year, we're obviously continuing to develop the 5-year plan for each school as we complete projects and new information comes up. Alignment with our long-range facility plan, our strategic planning and asset management plan, the 5-year capital plan, local capital and planning. Something that the 5-year plan for each school, we're hoping to move away from a continuous intake and have each school sort of treat their facility like we treat our district and do an annual plan review and to help with prioritization. And also the refinement of an approval process, which is an ongoing process. And that's it.
Through the chair, regarding the development of a 5-year plan for each school facility, do you think that will more accurately reflect for the facilities department the needs of each individual school site?
Yes.
Thank you.
And and it can help us prioritize as well.
I think if I could add, I think along with better prioritizing what the schools are after, because we've put all the projects into one list, and it's not this is our number one IT, and this is our number one access, and this is our number one learning services. And you can imagine if each school had 5 number ones that we had to address and multiply by 40 facilities, it'd be an unmanageable level of projects. So the other thing we're attempting to do is to make sure that we are addressing the cumulative number one. And I believe what will happen is that we'll start to align our deliverable ability, our ability to deliver from that huge list with the school's expectations of our ability to deliver, so that we have, better alignment in that.
Thank you.
Do we have any other questions around AFG for either of our presenters? Okay, seeing none. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Very thorough and very interesting as always. Okay, moving on to the next item of our agenda, Secretary Treasurer McVeigh is wanting to talk, is going to go over some things for us regarding budget 2019-20.
Okay. Well, to start with, we have quite a few things on the list to get through, but thanks to Elka and to Karen, you have in front of you, you should each have your 1920 budget binder. So maybe we'll just start there. I'm going to quickly go through what you've got in here, but mostly it's information that you can refer to as we go through the budget process, some background documents. Under tab 1, we've got the budget calendar, subject to change as we need to. Under tab 2 is our audited financial statements from last year. Under tab 3, we've got the financial statement discussion and analysis that we introduced for the first time last year. And essentially what this is a document that explains our audited financial statements in just a more layperson's way. So if you want to review anything related to our audited financial statements, I would suggest you look at that as opposed to the actual documents under tab 2. Tab 4 is the annual amended budget for the current year, so that you have that information as a comparison to as we're moving into 1920. Under tab 5, we have our quarterly reports that have been produced by our Director of Finance, Tanya Sutton. So that will also provide you with more information about our current year's budget and how we've been moving through the year. We'll continue to add the next quarterly reports to your binder as we go. And let me just see. Under tab 6, we've just provided room for the audited financial statements for 18-19, but of course those won't be produced until the end of the year. And under tab 7 through, I'm just not going to go through 7 through 10, are just some documents related to our current strategic plan, our reconciliation framework, long-range facilities plan, the learning framework. These are all kind of guiding documents that our budget should be aligned with. So again, just more information for you to be able to review. Under tab 11 is what we will be addressing today, going through budget criteria and guiding principles. Under tab 12, you've seen this document before. Again, Director of Finance Sutton introduced this for the first time last year, and it's just an easier document to explain our budget process and again, in layperson's terms, how we go through that, what considerations we take into consideration. Tab 13 is the budget operating grant manual, which explains the operating grant manual that's produced by the Ministry of Education. Tab 14 is our 3-year enrollment projections. Under tab 15 will be the estimated operating grants for 1920. Again, we won't have that information yet, so we'll be adding to our binder as we move through the next few months. We'll have those operating grant announcements by March 15th. There's some place for some notes as you need to make them. And essentially all the other tabs are empty because they're just going to be information that we give to you and you can slide into the binder as we go along. Make sense?
Yes.
No questions, okay. How do we make this fun, Tanya? Actually, that brings us to the budget overview and monitoring process, and Tanya's actually just going to spend a few minutes talking to you or reminding you about what the process is, what we go through, what we're doing behind the scenes right now.
So that would be that tab 12, the brochure, which at this point is, of course, outdated as far as the per pupil amounts. We are assuming that on the March 15th funding announcement, those will be updated. Not sure what that looks like, but that's something that we account for in the process right now, so we will be removing those old rates in with the new rates and hopeful that there will be an increase there, but that's not necessarily the case, so it's a bit of a caution on our behalf. So at this point in time, the board has just approved the annual amended budget for the current fiscal year, which now I have taken and flipped into the 1920 base budget. And essentially what I'm doing is I'm looking at everything from the economic environment, interest rates, inflation, costs of goods such as fuel, gas, supplies, professional services, making shifts and changes where we feel those may be required, looking at planned changes from the previous year, which could be shifts in focus of priorities such as technology and educational resources, reassessing our local capital demands, looking at one-time initiatives that may or may not be necessary in the current budget, departmental realignments due to attrition or shifts in business or educational focus or priority, depending on whether they're applicable. And there's always ministry-directed change to fund allocations or approved expenditures. We can get direction from them regarding what we can spend on, what we can staff, what we can do within special purpose funds. So just being cognizant of whether or not there are changes coming down the pipe, which yet to hear of. At this time, we believe the Classroom Enhancement Fund is being status quo rolled over for us. Again, that will be announced on March 15th, but from what we've heard so far, we're moving forward with what the supports we have currently in for next year. We, of course, update for our student enrollment for the MOE grants, Ministry of Ed grants, the special purpose grants, other revenues where there may be shifts and changes, such as our estimated ISE enrollment, rentals and leases. We have to account for salary increases, which this year is particularly challenging because we've got collective agreements that are outstanding. So bargaining is happening. What those rates look like, we're yet to determine. So we're going to have to make some decisions as to what those will look like and sort that out in the budget. Our average teacher salary, as months progress and we track that, we are looking like we are a little low in the budget, so we're going to have to make an adjustment there. That comes at a significant cost. Benefit rates, we'll look at what we currently have, what rates are, where there's some changes. It looks like the EHT will be funded by the ministry, but still yet to be determined what that looks like for the remainder of this year and into next year. That, I believe, as well will be announced with the funding announcement. There will be some sort of information provided to us. We look at our sick replacement costs. Do we need to shift or change those? What are our technology needs going forward? Again, to the questions regarding conversions of labs. Those are, of course, aligned with the IT department and what needs to be added for that local capital in order to support those. Infrastructural support such as Wi-Fi, network support, system upgrades, phones, things like that all must be considered. Are the current supports relevant to our business operations today and next year? Equipment needs and replacement such as upgrading small appliances at schools, furnitures, computers, devices, things like that. And where funding permits, how do we realign or allocate resources to support the district's goals and priorities, i.e. the guiding principles that we're discussing. So what is our focus? Local capital, technology, graduation supports, and so forth. So those have to be determined. And where we are able to shift funds, we can look at doing so. We have infused a great deal of supports over the last year, so there's not a anticipated amount of wiggle room in this budget coming up, which is why we've sort of indicated status quo. But where we see shifts, or where we see the potential for shifts and changes due to increased revenue, then these items will be determined. So over the course of the next couple of weeks, this work, all the analysis that goes into it will be taking place. Funding announcement on the 15th, which will provide some insight as to where we're actually sitting. And then just continued work to get it to a place where it's somewhere where we can bring it back and present where we're at and then make any shifts and changes we need to. So that's sort of where we're at right now. Questions, comments?
So we have a good understanding of the budget process, given what Tanya's just, everybody's good, okay. So on page 34 of your package, I've put together an information sheet, again about budget planning, giving you some background. I don't want to spend a lot of time on it because you've probably all had an opportunity to read it. Obviously, the budget should reflect the board's strategic plan. We're all aware that the board is undertaking a new strategic plan and long-range facilities plan. But in the meantime, we have to guide this budget based on the current strategic plan, and therefore, in the information sheet, we've just outlined the current board goals and the vision, mission, and values. I'm looking at page 36 right now, and one of the things that we are proposing to do that's probably a little bit different than the last few years is embed some guiding principles for the annual budgeting process, probably into a policy which we'll put forth in the coming months. But for tonight, we just outlined what we believe should be guiding principles to the budget. Obviously, it needs to comply with the School Act and district policy. It needs to be balanced. It needs to be aligned again with the strategic plan and goals. We always want to provide an opportunity for staff and stakeholders to provide input and report out on budgets. Any new initiatives should be sustainable for at least a 3-year process. Ongoing costs should not be ever greater than ongoing revenues. District contingency reserves that are established and maintained in accordance with board policy. So a bit of a reminder that we adopted our surplus policy last year. Initiatives that are not within our mandate, K-12, at the very least should be cost neutral. One-time revenues and surpluses should really only ever be used for one-time costs. And of course, we always encourage efficiency, sustainability, and best practices.
A question from Mr. Zver.
Yeah, it goes down to when you talk about planning and strategic piece for the trustees, if the standard is sort of the status quo budget, it already must be meeting the mandate of what the strategic goal is, because we wouldn't be here. So when you're asking about assuring that it meets it, I would have to say the amended budget and everything else has already done that. Mm-hmm. So when I look at this, it's kind of a guiding principle to say we're already doing all of this. If you wish to make changes, those changes need to reflect something that stands the same practice, rather than saying we want to make sure it's in the practice, because everything's already there. So if a new initiative comes forward, what value does it bring within the practice of the strategic plan? And if you have to remove something, how does that impact the strategic plan going forward? Is rather than saying the rest of it, because they're going to build a new one for their term, I guess, and there'll be a different way to look at it come 2021. But for this one, I mean, the principles have already been followed. So I don't know how you, unless you rewrite a whole budget, how can you not stick within the strategic plan? How do you not stay in the goals?
Right, so again, included in the information sheet, the reason these are here is one of the requirements under the financial health working group is that we put into place a policy around budget planning. And that policy, again, will be the next on our list. We've already completed a few of those requirements, the surplus policy, the financial discussion analysis paper. And I guess what we're suggesting is that guiding principles be embedded into that policy, and then it just guides your work from year to year to year. And it's just...
But that would be going forward, because...
Of course, well, we're going forward into 1920. So those principles would guide any of the decisions that one would make from year to year. Am I not addressing your comment?
Yeah, well, you sort of said that they were going to look at changing some of their strategic goals. And all I'm saying, if your direction, and it seems to be somewhat been talked about, is that we're looking status quo, So in
Then the
terms of
status
what you're,
quo would reflect the current
so what you're
strategic
telling
plan?
the trustees and the rest of us, we're in that, and if you make changes, how does that reflect to the strategic plan? Rather than saying, you know, we've got to keep within the goals, we're in the goals. Any changes would then have to be following that process to
Absolutely.
maintain. That's all.
Right.
I'm just,
Yeah.
because it seems like we keep driving that we need to look at the goals and they must have been met, because you've already requesting, here's our budget, can you, if you want to change it, how does that reflect? So
Trustee Higgins, sorry. You want, Trustee Higginson?
Thanks. I really appreciate the guiding principles. I think that's a wonderful addition.
Yes.
There's a lot about this binder that I appreciate that we haven't had before. The inclusion of the minister's mandate letter. I think that's really important. I appreciate this. Two things that I'd like to add. Maybe this is implied in everything we do, but I still think it should be a bullet that the budget is built with student needs at the center. Something like that. And also, we provide an opportunity for staff to report out on their budgets, but I'd also like us to have a bullet that provides an opportunity for students to provide input to the budget. And along the same lines, in the calendar, there's opportunities for stakeholders and partner groups and our staff to provide input, but we haven't invited students. And I'd really like to hear from them. I'd like us to, you know, through our principals or something, you know, put it out to students to try and, you know, I think this could actually be quite interesting and fascinating to have students, you know, ask their fellow students what they would like to see in the budget, what they're missing. And I know in other districts when they do this, they get really awesome stuff that varies all the way from we don't like the toilet paper to we would like to have smaller class sizes because we think having a relationship with our teacher is the most important way for us to succeed or something. So it's really meaningful information. And I'd like us to try to build that into our calendar as well.
And I wonder if maybe we can talk about that just at the end when we talk about public engagement and how the board would like to do that this year. But before we get there, again on page 36, we've also, although staff are recommending a status quo budget, we have at least 3 issues that we likely need to address, and that would be the surplus funding that went for the school community coordinators, surplus funding for the VAST satellite program to continue. And again, I keep saying this over and over again, I sound like a broken record. We will likely need to transfer more into our local capital budget to support space needs and technology infrastructure. So earlier, Trustee Keller asked about that, and we do have a serious issue more in relation to our infrastructure. We have devices, but we have some Wi-Fi issues, and you know, we can talk about that at another time, but that's another issue that's front of mind.
Trustee Barron.
Through the chair, could you just clarify the VAST satellite program? Is that referring to Woodlands?
Yes. So when we opened up that program, it was done through, again, surplus monies were targeted for that. About 100,000 went towards capital. You know, equipment, just fixing everything up, getting it going, and about a couple 100,000 for staffing. So it's the staffing portion that we would need to look as ongoing funding, and it would need to be embedded in our operating budget. So those are like 3 high-level things that we need to keep in mind. So the other thing that's kind of new, and maybe a little bit more to Stephanie's point, is I think that although you have a strategic plan and you have guiding principles, every year that you do a budget, you might have a different focus, and criteria will help you make decisions as you develop the preliminary budget, but also the amended budget and any money that you might have freed up throughout the year. It would guide your spending. And so I wanted to take the group through a bit of an exercise on developing or prioritizing budget criteria. So I'm going to be handing out some sticky dots in a minute, and we're all going to get up. So what I've put in front of you is 10 different criteria that are not in a particular priority order. I don't know if anybody had any questions about those or disagreements with them, but I wanted them as a starting conversation. And if there's any that you think we've missed, we could add to. But if not, I wanted to, we put all of these criteria on the back wall, and we were going to get you to go up and pick your top 5, the top 5 that would be most important to you. And obviously that's going to reveal what the priority order would be from the business committee, and will help guide our decisions going forward. So if, for example, there's one up there with regards to technology and facility infrastructure, if that for whatever reason got the most dots, we would know that a real priority for 1920 is to focus on that. And as we go throughout the year, our decisions, if we have competing priorities, and we always do, from multiple departments and initiatives, we'll be able to say, you know, we have to pick this initiative over that one, because we've said as a group that's what's most important.
Trustee Higginson?
So once we do this, is it just going to be the ones with the most, that we're not going to kind of narrow it down, or it's just going to be, I'm sticking all my 5 on one?
Okay, so we have rules for dotmocracy. We have rules. You're all going to get 6 dots. You can only pick 5. Your top 5, which means one can get 2 dots.
We can say that again. I was listening to Rhett.
The most is 2.
So, but before I start, are there any questions about the criteria that's been proposed for you? Can we put red on? Like, I'm competing with a child. I can't. Like, I can't win that.
No, you can't.
Just trying to pass a motion.
Can you just say the rules again about why I can't put all 5 on one?
Because I get to make up the rules,
Okay.
because I'm
I just
facilitating
didn't
the
hear
exercise.
rules. I'm sorry, I just didn't hear them.
And let's keep in mind, this is an exercise to see what's going to evolve in terms of, you know, priority. And there are going to be recommendations from the business committee to the board. So, you know, this is not set in stone, but it's an exercise.
I look forward to it.
Ms.
And I'll
Wood?
tell you the rules in a minute.
Ms. Wood and then Mr. Zver.
I just have a question as to where the criteria statements came from, and is there any discussion about things that might be added to the criteria statements?
Yeah, that was my first comment. Before we move on to this, is there anything in this list that people would disagree with or would like to add to? Because we can add another one to the wall. So have we missed something?
Trustee Barry.
And where did they come from? I've just looked at a number of different policies and their criteria statement that I've used in the past when I worked with Mission, and again did some research on other school districts that had various criteria statements. So, you know, a lot of it is pretty common sense and makes it, yeah.
Mr. Zver and then Trustee Barry.
It's just one of the balances. My mandate here is doesn't reflect in how this is, because I'm not here about this is what education is. But my mandate when I'm here on the business committee and the budget is to try to maintain and provide services for which I represent. And they're not flushed out in this, because you can put this in there and say, well, why would somebody think of that? It's not because it's the most important, it's what I have to stand for. So when I'm not going to participate in sticking stars up there and somebody says, well, you agreed with that, because mine's to agree is to say fairness in how the budget needs to be done. I need to speak about whether the support staff are being treated equitably within the budget dynamics, because we provide frontline services that don't necessarily get graded to how a student learns. EAs or assistants, but they don't get graded on how a student learns. They're there because they're assisting the teacher on how that student's going to learn. So I won't participate, so I'm just going to say, don't give me any stickies, and not that I don't value that, but I'm not going to be putting something in there that says, how do you prioritize what that meant and where did it come from? So I'm just putting that out there. It's not a mandate that I'll take on.
And these are, again, guiding principles and criteria that we're going to use to make decisions. I mean, staff will actually operationalize those or determine what those look like. But you're a valuable member of the business committee, and therefore we wanted to do something a bit more inclusive.
I hear you.
But I respect the fact that you might not want to participate.
Does anybody have any other questions or comments? Or Trustee McKay?
On optimize our capacity for system-wide leadership support and succession, can we include in that employee wellness?
Would our executive assistant, Matthews,
I don't
like to
know.
add
We
that
could go
to the sticky note that has that on it? She's like, no, I don't. I was just asking if we could add that to the Post-it note that's up there.
The last point, optimize.
Okay, so, oh, sorry, Greg has a
Or including.
Sorry, Mr. Trustee Keller.
Just a question, like, maybe this is in here somewhere, but I'm wondering if we should have some kind of criteria related to sort of sustainable facilities, whether that's emissions, energy reduction, or fleet operations, greenhouse gas emissions, something like that. Does that fit within this kind of criteria that we're considering?
I would suggest it's provide adequate sustainable budgets for facilities and technology to sustain necessary infrastructure.
Well,
I guess not, maybe. Trustee McKay? Is that it?
No, I have something else.
Okay.
I want to finish.
Okay.
Trustee Keller?
Yeah, Trustee Keller?
so I'm just putting that out there, because from my perspective, it's important for us to consider that in our budget.
I would agree.
Why doesn't she go on there?
And then now Trustee McKay, and then I'll get myself on the.
Do we want to add that as one?
Yes. Yes. Okay. So Trustee McKay.
How would we
Thank you. Through the chair to Ms. Matthews, I'd like my employee wellness one to be separate for
Okay.
all employees. Sorry.
Energy, water efficiency, greenhouse
And
Took an extra minute
then
to
Ms.
think about
Wood.
it.
No, I was going to say the same thing.
Okay.
Oh, perfect.
And then Trustee Barron.
Yes, thank you, through the chair. We can add that, the curious bubble above my head right now. I'm very, I'm trying to wrap my head around this. So the budget criteria is basically, right now, what we're trying to do is identify the priorities of setting the criteria of best practice around our budget. But is this not what we're doing in our strategic planning? And if yes, should we not be just taking our decisions of our strategic planning and popping it in here? I'm wondering why we're doing it. I think it's good, but I'm just trying to understand the work that we're doing on our strategic plan and this, why it's feeling like they're separate, two separate activities.
Well, they're not separate, right? I mean, at a very high level, you have a strategic plan that sets kind of a long-term period of time. Let's say you have a strategic plan, you've got 4 board goals, and that sets the vision over a 4-year period. But every year, the annual budget might have a slightly different focus. So I might speculate that this year, a focus is going to be on space needs and a local capital. But 2 years from now, you might say, you know what, we really need to be focusing on, again, literacy and numeracy. That's the primary focus. The whole point is, yes, you have a strategic plan that guides at a high level, but from year to year, you're going to have a different focus in terms of how do we prioritize this year and why? That doesn't make sense. So it's like saying, you know, I don't want to use a car analogy because I know nothing about cars, but, you know,
But you're going to anyway.
but I'm going to anyways, no. So I really want a brand new pair of shoes. What kind of shoes do I want? Heels, flats, you know. This is maybe a better analogy or not. How do I make that decision? Like, how do I decide? And I've only got $100. How am I going to decide which pair of shoes am I going to buy? It's trying to provide the, and again, maybe this is a new concept because we haven't done it before. How do you inform what's most important? So you have $100,000 to spend, and facility needs more money, finance needs more money. The board would like to put into place a food share program. We need to put more technology upgrades in place, but we only have $200,000. What are the priorities for this year that will help us decide in a more transparent and inclusive way where we're going to direct that money first? So we can go back to the budget criteria and say, well, we spent the $200,000 on technology because we all agreed that that was the number one priority to get us through this year. Does that explain it better?
I think so. Trustee Barron, did you have a follow-up?
Just, you're all looking at me like.
No, I think I
Is
get
this
it.
going to be one of these failure moments?
No,
where
this
I'll
is
learn
good.
later?
No, just to respond, I agree with you completely. I mean, the reality is our strategic plan is not going to be done in time for budget
Right.
this year. So I
Right.
think this is a valuable exercise for us to go through. My thinking and the reason why I asked the question is because I had thought that our strategic planning process, as you referred to as a high-level planning process, I had thought that the process we would dig a little deeper. We'd have a superficial, not superficial, but a high-level focus, but then we'd also have within that the how-to and the goals, and that I thought would feed into our budget process. So perhaps this is something that we can sort as we move forward, and because the reality is we don't have that to guide us for this particular budget. But thank you for clarifying.
It's
Just trying to.
about setting priorities, and even after the strategic plan is done, I would suggest this is an exercise you kind of go through every year, because
Yes.
again, every year you're going to only have, X amount of dollars with a lot of competing priorities, but how are you going to make those decisions?
Trustee Higginson?
Sorry, I know we all just want to get up and put our stairs.
Yes.
I would like also to suggest that we do this exercise again after we've had the budget consultation process and heard from the public
Yeah.
and maybe the students, all that kind of stuff. Because I think we may think things now, and then maybe after consultation we may feel differently. I just think it would be interesting to do it again
I
after.
completely agree.
Yeah, and absolutely we can do that, but it was, let's challenge our brains a little bit, get you a little bit more involved than perhaps we've done in the past, and if nothing else, it'll be interesting. So, okay, so
Before we do that,
is.
I'm
oh,
gonna,
okay.
I think I have another one, but someone may tell me that it's already there. For me, it's, that we need to, that there's more to supporting students to be successful in education than academics. That we take a holistic approach to supporting kids. Pardon?
Co-curricular programs.
Okay, is that what that means? Thank you.
Well, and there's also safe, healthy, and inclusive learning.
Yeah, okay, so it would fall under that. Okay, thank you.
And so here's the rules. I'm going to hand them out. The goal is to identify top 5 budget criteria if you choose to participate. So we've already talked about, are there any new items? We're going to add one more to the wall. Maybe Karen again can help us, or Tanya, put up sustainability practices, energy and greenhouse gas emissions, and another one for wellness. When I say put it up, could we put a post-it note, another 2 post-it notes up on the wall? Oh, are you doing it?
No. Because I'd want 8.
Put one on everything.
Each participant gets 6 dots. So there's 12 items that are up there. You only get 6 dots. And you can only pick your top 5, which means one of your top 5 can get 2 dots. And you can't split dots, you can't trade, you can't cheat.
I can't buy dogs.
Can I, what if I narrow it down to 3 and
Just say no.
Okay, and I'm gonna, can you pass those along?
I can.
Yeah, I'll
No
pass some this.
cheating. Do you want staff to vote? Since it's not a formal vote? Like, we're not our own colors. The colors don't matter. Matters to me. We get our own copy of the rules. I didn't get rules though.
Right here.
Oh, sweet.
I don't need a copy.
No, not trading, no cheating, no splitting. Yes. Okay, we're done. Okay.
Parking at the back.
I'm paying first results.
No way.
Oh, you're gonna have to get someone to reach for you.
Yeah, I'm too short.
I know how much fun.
Two dots on the she said
You gotta watch this one, Karen. You gotta watch this one. She's flying. Really important.
That's exactly it. Like, it's because.
No, I have extra.
You look at it and say, where does.
Hello. Okay, I'm short.
I can't prioritize anybody by saying.
That's embarrassing. Now it's gonna be obvious which one was
And you wouldn't even know.
I just stay out of it.
I really didn't know.
Here, you can look, I'm gonna keep my.
Okay, this one.
You might have a chance to eat it.
I want to report back.
I kind of feel like I'm cheating. I know it's not, but sort of.
That's good, yeah. There's some research behind that.
Well, you got yours up there quick?
Yeah. You don't have to overthink it. It's because you can overthink it to the point of you're gonna not know what to do.
That's why I'm not participating. I will wear Susan Johnson's while you didn't put us over.
I'm watching everyone do what you got there.
See, I'm done. No one even knows about it. Everybody's But that's the thing too, for me, it's like I'm speaking for, I'm one individual, not every parent, so.
Well,
Awkward.
literally, it was on you.
55 different scripts, 55 different dynamics within.
I supports for the teachers, right? But I appreciate where you're coming from on that. But in my mind, the ones that are important to me are that part of it. Your pressure is sort of closer to God.
I try to find out that to take either side of it. Whether they need 1 hour.
Yep. And that's your role, right? So that's important. It's really like the technology side of yours too, Rob. The technology side is yours too. I'm not, that's not my focus, but that would need to be yours as well.
It's quite unique to hear from the DCAT now representing parents. She says success rate has nothing to do with budget. So, you want to explain that?
Yeah. It's not that simple, in my opinion.
She said you put all the money you want, but the resources aren't hitting all.
Yeah, I guess. I'll take it. You are so compliant. That's right. My middle name is compliant. Karen's mom always watching. We have one watching, we don't
Are you just putting a number on it? Yeah, just
I'm good. Sometimes I think they go hand in hand.
I'm not playing, that's probably why.
Maximize success and completion rates for our most vulnerable students. Interestingly enough, something in the funding formula review.
You have 5.
So number 1 ended up being that. I don't know if that surprises anybody. It doesn't surprise me. Number 2 in order of priority would be optimize our schools and facilities as safe, healthy, and inclusive learning spaces and workplaces. And yes, we have a tie. So Stephanie, do you want to be the one to have the extra dot?
No.
It's Rob's turn.
You're the only one with stickers.
Provide greater supports and opportunities
I
embed.
lean to those are both important, but I lean to that one more so at this point of what we're doing. So provide the greater supports and opportunities and enable the Indigenous culture teaching and curriculum for all students is a goal, and that needs to be a start regardless. So I would put mine there and I'll break the tie. There, the only one I'm voting on. Well, facilities would have got mine, but that would have mattered.
So, yeah, so 1. 2. So 4 is providing a variety of pathways for every student to meet his required learning outcomes. And 5
There's 2
is-
more ties again.
Oh, yeah.
Ties.
Oh, where?
No,
There is. Okay, so Rob.
Well,
If you had only voted.
See, now I'd go back to provide the adequate sustainable budget facilities technology. If you got the other ones with the providing the supports and stuff, that one will fall right into place, maximizing success completion rates for our most vulnerable. So learning and literacy would go hand in hand. That's where it struggles.
I think the one that has 20 votes goes really, the one that has 11 beside it, maximizing support for students learning and literacy and numeracy is how
Part of 20.
Yeah.
That's why I went to the other. It's part of 20.
That's what you do, yeah, to maximize success.
So.
Yeah.
So are we all gonna like go so far as to say this could be possibly the recommendation from the business committee to the board for budget criteria? Or will we wait and bring the exercise back?
I don't think you're going to change much if it's that high.
Yeah. We'll just have to
Or should
see
we
how
just leave it at that?
We should just leave it at that.
Take it in.
And compare how it turns out with our.
Well, the 5th one was adequate sustainable budget for facilities and technology. What was the 5th one?
We'll send it out.
Okay, thank you.
In the order in which it fell.
Thank you. That would also give us time to, yeah.
Okay, thank you for participating in that.
Thank you for doing it. For writing it to us. All right.
So the next thing we want to talk about is engaging with the public and how we might like to do that. And I've talked a little bit with Dale because we've just recently engaged the public on the strategic plan, and that's given us some really good information. And sometimes when we engage the public too much, we don't get much of a response. So there's lots of options. We can do that again. We can engage the public through thought exchange. Could do a different type of survey. We could hold an open house. We could do just a public meeting and invite students. So I just wanted to create some discussion around what everyone around the table thinks. And Dale, I don't know if you want to provide further to that.
I can give a background if you'd like, just on what we've done in the past.
Yeah.
Okay. So through the chair, hold on, take the microphone here, sorry. Okay. So through the chair, what we've done in the past is we started using surveys, for example, and SurveyMonkey was always one of those ones we'd like to use. And I may have talked about this before, so apologies if you've heard it, but when we throw out the questions, and whether it's 10 questions or 30 questions, it's great, we can report back, but a lot of the feedback, a lot of the great feedback we received was from those open-ended responses. And so a lot of the times, or rather there was a couple times where I quite literally gave a 200-300 page document that had all these open-ended responses in for the board members to go through that and to really decipher what was really top of mind for everybody. It was really difficult. So we started exploring some other avenues on how we can engage with public so that it's electronic for one, or something that's just convenient for them, they can do it at home, that sort of thing. So we came up with a couple ideas. There's something called Play Speak, there's Bang the Table, then there's also Thought Exchange. A number of years ago, you may remember, we used something called ThoughtStream. This was 6-7 years ago maybe or so, maybe even longer. Same company, they're based out of BC, and now they're called Thought Exchange. And so they're a rating system. So essentially you share your thought, or you don't have to share a thought, but you can go on to Thought Exchange and you can essentially look at what people are thinking, and then rate those thoughts from 1 star to 5 stars. Is essentially what it is. Then what happens is you get those top ratings or the top thoughts, and put them on into a report. And what happens then is you see what a lot of people are in agreement with, and what's important and what's top of mind to them. So that's what's been really great for Thought Exchange. So a couple years ago, we did surveys, we did some face-to-face meetings. We created a north, central, and south meeting. Those ones were, they took a lot of time and money and energy, and the return on investment was not that great, I'll just say. I mean, so at one meeting, I think we only had about 6 people show up, and they were, I think, all PAC parents, right? And so thankfully, for the PAC to show up to those meetings, we've probably been there again, right? So Charlene was at all as well. Now, those were great. Yes, the face-to-face. We have some really good face-to-face ones where we created a specific invite list, and those we invited local government officials, for example, First Nations leaders, that sort of thing, students, and so we got some really good feedback from them. And because we invited them directly, we had some really good RSVP numbers, and those ones turned out really great. So that's an idea. The surveys we stepped away from, like what I had just said, there was a lot of information to decipher in a 300-page document. Thought Exchange took that. A little bit more on Thought Exchange. We opened it up recently for the strategic planning, and we had some great responses. Last year we had a very big engagement through Thought Exchange, our biggest so far, but that was a big one, and there was about 82,000 ratings. I believe it was 12,000, 13,000 parents, I believe it was, that took part. That was some of our best numbers that we had ever seen in an exchange. Again, don't quote me, I can go back on the numbers, I'm just going by memory here. But what we've done is we've opened it up to just everybody. So instead of just opening it up to just parents or students, for example, in this most recent one for the strategic planning, we opened it up to QB, NDTA, or rather you can choose as a demographic question. If you've done it, you would have known QB, NDTA excluded or non-applicable, and then also if you're a community member, student, or parent. So we can break it down by taking those demographics. For example, I'm also a parent, so I'm an excluded staff and also parent. Same thing for our NDTA staff. Many are parents, so there's always that feeling that you're both, right? So are you representing NDTA, or are you representing QB, or are you representing the parent, that sort of thing. So those are why we opened those up. Just it's self-identifying. You don't have to identify. You can just say not applicable, of course. But again, those are our options, and we can explore those further. I do want to just throw one more thought, if I could. There's other ways to engage as well, and it's not that we have to do surveys or a thought exchange or face-to-face. I mean, even, and I'm coming up with different ideas as we go along, but social media is also a big one as well. We saw the engagement numbers that the snow days created here in the district, and if we created a live, Facebook Live or Twitter Live, and we engage that way, and people can quite literally in their pajamas at home take part. They don't have to have a babysitter. They don't have to find, somebody to watch their kids. So there's options out there, and of course that's what we can start looking at as a district and as a board for your direction.
Oh.
Thank you.
Okay, I've started a speakers list. I've got Trustee Keller and then Miss Wood and then Trustee Barron. I've got myself on there, but before I get to do that, is there anyone else here who'd like to be on the speakers list at this point? Okay, then Trustee Keller.
Thank you. I guess this is a good, through the chair, plug for why we need a public participation policy, and hopefully we'll get to that point. But I have full confidence that our staff can come up with a plan. However, I believe the best approach from my perspective would be to request that a public participation plan be presented back to, I don't know if it would be the committee or the board, with some timelines and tools and ideas that we can put out there for sort of a comprehensive approach to engaging with our students and community, and in that way it's transparent. Everyone knows what to expect throughout the process and the timeline. So that would be my thoughts around how we could approach this.
Okay. Ms. Wood.
I just want to maybe correct Mr. Burgos that when an NDTA member does speak on Thought Exchange, they don't represent the NDTA. They only represent their own individual voice, and the NDTA is represented by the democratic leadership that they've elected.
Yeah.
Same on those.
Same for CUPE.
Trustee Barron.
Yes, through the chair, I think it's along the lines of what Ms. Wood was speaking to. I'm just curious to know some clarification for the community in all capacities who are wanting to participate in thought exchange around the whether it's anonymous or not. Mm-hmm. And because I heard the comment around the NDTA and CUPE being excluded prior, correct me if I'm wrong, and so I'm wondering how that would have even happened if it's anonymous. I'm just trying to figure out, can somebody, I understand that I'm not understanding, but I'm hoping to get some clarity around when somebody goes on the thought exchange, are they anonymous? And because I'm thinking for staff members who want to speak honestly, I would hope that there's an option for them to speak anonymously around their thoughts without any concerns of negative repercussions because of their role. That's
so through the chair to Trustee Barron, yes, it can be completely anonymous. There's no sign-in information. You don't have to leave your email. It's completely anonymous signing in. You don't have to choose that you are NDTA, CUPE or excluded. So there's a non-applicable option as well in terms of the strategic plan thought exchange that we just recently did. That was, again, through some consultations with our consultant and wanting to know what we wanted to put out there. So no, I mean, there were options. If you didn't want to say that you are a staff member, you can completely say that you're just non-applicable, for example, or a parent or a student.
And just to confirm, but you can put in there who you are. You'd like your identity revealed, you can.
Well, if you put it in your thought, or when you sign in, you can sign in with an email, so you can go back in later, but that email doesn't get published anywhere in terms of when you look at the thought exchange. It doesn't say Dale Burgos said this thought. It wouldn't say that. So it's always anonymous.
Mr. Zver.
Yeah, one of it's about partly is, and Dale tried to answer it, if you don't put anonymous, you have this structure of fidelity. But be very careful how you say things about your employer in words to them, because you're an employee first. So, participation means you want to say something negative. You have to be very careful on how that could be, because if it's general public knowledge, somebody takes offense to it, you're in for discipline. Because the fidelity rule. So, will people participate? Not likely as much, because they know that they have to be careful about how they may make comments. And that's just the nature of the beast. I tell them not to, in a roundabout way, unless it's one that's directly neutral to how it would come out, but not one that's an opinion that could be taken at a point of where you're frustrated with things being done and you mark yourself in there inappropriately. So.
Okay, Trustee Higginson.
So I would like to support what Trustee Keller said and just provide staff with some of the things that I would like to hear out of an engagement process. And I'd like to be able to hear student voice, particularly directly if we could get them in here talking to us. I would like us to, I do know that we've done some consultation on the strategic plan and that there is the risk of over-consulting, but I'd rather be accused of over-consulting than under. And people may not have wanted to engage in the strategic plan, but they know that they get an opportunity, like the 9 people that do it regularly every year. They would like the opportunity to. So I would like us to continue to provide the opportunity through Thought Exchange to do it. My personal preference is for it not to be anonymous, because I find that becomes license for poor behavior. And so I would prefer, but this can be a board decision, that it not be anonymous and that people do have to put their names to it. If they have something that they want to say to us, they should be able to say it in a way that is constructive. So those are my criteria, and I think that maybe by next week we can hear from you guys what you want to do so that we can get it going.
This week? I just want to say that I didn't attend the invite-only sessions the last time that we did this, a couple times, and I found those very valuable. And I found when you have, especially with having a group of students there, I found that whoever brought the students separated the students, so there was a really broad mix at each table, so you were really getting a good thought exchange within the group and a further discussion of ideas, and it really empowered students to be honest and open and say exactly what they thought, because they knew there was no repercussions. So I found that was very helpful.
Mr. Steele.
Just a couple of comments on the thought exchange. We did one at NDSS last year. It was very popular. We ended up with over 800 different respondents and over 1,500 different thoughts. So, like, within it, you set it up. It's highly orchestrated how you set it up. So it was anonymous, and I do think that because it's anonymous, then people aren't worried when they put anything down. But you could have them toggle off if they were a student, a staff member, a community member, and then it'll break it down demographically, so you can see what's really important for students or what's really important for staff, or however you want to slice it. And then you could have launch points, like it could be a public session with Chromebooks and things like that, so people could participate right there. And usually the window's pretty. They recommend a window of about a week that it's open, and then it really hones people in. And you can promote how many days are left and how many thoughts have been put in, and you can stimulate it that way. So it's actually quite it's easy to use.
Okay, Trustee Don, I'm going to ask you to wait because Trustee came and spoke again.
Thank you. Through the chair, my preferences to staff would be that we do utilize thought exchange and an invite session where we're making sure that we're including the student invites in that. I think is important, but I have to agree with what's been said here. They were very valuable sessions
To sit through. Out of all of the ones that I've sat through, those were the ones I took the most away from. So I do think that that's a way for us to prioritize. And thirdly, I thought I was going to keep it to 2, but honestly, I'd like to see what the communications department can do with regards to engaging via social media.
Trustee Keller, and then I want to get, there's something I'm trying to say, but I'll wait. No, okay, I would just want to say I agree with what everyone else said. I have complete confidence in the communications department to figure out how to do it. There's a big part of me that's really curious what the public, how close we are in terms of what we just did, in terms of what our top 5 were, compared to what the public would say their top 5 are at using this same list. Just a straight rank ordering. And that might not be the only thing that you do, but it would be one activity that could be used in some way. Yeah. And then now to you, Trustee Keller. Because that wasn't a question, it was just a thought.
Thank you. So I think we've had a great conversation around, a lot of us have identified a number of different tools, if you will, for public consultation. But we haven't really got into like, what are our objectives for consultation? When do we engage with the community? At what stages through the process, and how? And what are we looking to get back from our communities? So I'll be looking for some recommendations and from staff on sort of how you see that working at different stages of the process, and what our sort of objectives are, and what tools we might use to achieve those different objectives.
Okay. You can take care. All right, anything else from anybody? Okay. Ms. McVeigh, do you have anything else under 8.2?
No, thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everybody. We have no correspondence and no unfinished business. We do have actually unfinished business. 10.1, also Secretary Treasurer McVeigh regarding the funding formula review. I'd like to thank those of you who had time to send in comments and thoughts around that, and I believe I'll just hand it over to you, Carrie. And I know, Ms. McKay, Trustee McKay, I know you have a motion, but I'm gonna do the report first.
On page 42 of your agenda is staff's feedback on the 22 recommendations made by the independent panel. And I don't think you want to listen to me recite them. You've all had a chance to read it. So I'll just, leave it to you to discuss and ask staff if you have any questions about our report.
Trustee Higginson?
I really want to extend my gratitude for this. I think this was extremely well done. I am really thankful that you incorporated, I think, the feedback that you heard from some of the trustees as well in here. And this is a very thorough report back to us, and it makes me feel like I understand the recommendations from the panel for our district in a much more wholesome way. And I think I also really, really appreciate the paragraph that talks about conceptually agreeing with things. I really appreciate that you were able to see the forest for the trees in here and not just focus on whether each recommendation is going to result in us losing $1 or gaining $1. I feel like I really have a better understanding of the big picture for us, so I'm really thankful. Personally, I believe that it's really important for us to submit something to the funding formula review process. I think that's going to come in a bit, and I think that that there's a lot of really good information here, and that we could use in that submission. And I'm really thankful for it. I also believe strongly that I personally support a funding model review. I think we recognize that there are a lot of the current system doesn't work very well. And so I encourage us, when we do provide a submission, to talk about the fact that, if it requires a motion from the board or not, that philosophically and conceptually, Niagara Lady Smith Public Schools agrees with the funding model review, and wants to participate in a meaningful way in order to move our funding model to a system that works better.
Okay. Trustee McKay?
And Rob's here.
Okay, yeah. Trustee McKay? I can wait. Okay, Mr. Zver?
Just this Tuesday, I'm actually on the panel. I got appointed to the part 4 that's looking at the reviewed recommendations as a committee representative. So I'm actually sitting with the Minister, Ian, and the rest of us. I think there's 12 on the committee, along with Secretary Treasurer from Surrey and a few other superintendents and stuff. So be interesting to see what comes through. We had our first initial meeting to talk about how that's going to be brought into place, I guess, under the articles, and then the other one, there's 3 other groups that are meeting, and then it'll come back, I guess, and I've got 3 more meetings to attend before May to try to get something out by June.
Okay, now, Ms. McKay? Oh. Thank you. Did I miss somebody? Okay, Trustee McKay first.
Oh wait.
Oh, okay.
Just to be fair.
Okay.
I just would say that I'm disappointed that staff agree with the recommendations, is like kind of the general statement. Coquitlam trustees have put a letter out speaking to the recommendations, providing their feedback. It's a letter that's signed by 5 partner groups, trustees, parents, CUPE, teachers, and principals. And they speak to, I didn't count them, but they speak to 5 or 6 recommendations that they oppose and why they oppose them. And I encourage you to read their letter and the supporting statements that go along with it, because it's, well, it's more in line with what I agree with. The NDTA will be working to oppose particularly Rec 6, but also parts of Rec 8. And we will be starting that campaign next week.
Now, Ms. Trustee McKay.
Trustees, we don't agree with them all either.
So I'd like to make a motion, and it's slightly edited from the one that I,
Oh.
No, it's okay. She can go. I just want to make sure you have the.
Yeah, I got your list, yeah.
It's slightly edited from the one that I circulated to the board earlier today. That the business committee recommend that the Board of Education of School District 68 and I'm a Ladysmith provide feedback on the funding model review to the Ministry of Education. Furthermore, that the letter state that the Board of Education has received input from our education partners.
Okay, do I have a seconder? Seconded by Trustee Keller. Discussion? Or do you want to speak to your motion and clarify your?
Yeah, so I think the intent all along has been that we would provide a response. And so this provides us the mechanism to provide the response. We can take the input that we collect here, the conversations that have been held both here and outside of this meeting from our partner groups, and include some of that in our response. And then I'd be interested to hear from the committee what else they'd like included in such a letter.
Okay. Anybody else? Oh.
I mean, it was before the motion, so I'll speak to that and then I'll speak to this. So I do find, you know, one of the things that I appreciated about this, the staff report here, is that it talks about, you know, it's difficult to list recommendations in order of importance based on a lack of detail provided. And so in the panel's report, so I find that it's just as difficult for us to say we oppose something as it is for us to say we support it due to the lack of detail in here. So I find it difficult to, I wouldn't be in support of a letter that says what we oppose, because some of the most tricky recommendations in here, part of the problem with them is because of the lack of detail. But I think that there's a lot of things about them that we can support the direction of and talk about that in a submission. And so, you know, there's so many clunky things with the system that I don't think that it's that need to be changed. You know, so I think that it would be unwise of us to simply say what we oppose. I think it's really important for us to talk about, you know, supporting the direction of the funding model review, and talking about the things that we do conceptually agree with, but requesting more information. Myself and Dr. Esliger are both on the working committee for inclusive education, so we've got 2 people from our district who are going to have access to some of the information. I'm sure will be embargoed like these things are, but it sounds like Nanaimo Ladysmith is well represented between Rob and Bob and myself. But I do encourage us to support this motion and provide a submission that talks about things where we may have concerns, as well as things that we support. I think it's really important to do that.
Trustee Keller and Trustee Byrne.
Through the chair, so I just wanted to say that I very much appreciate the staff report, and I appreciate the sort of balanced approach that it takes and provides us with an overall sort of understanding, despite the level of uncertainty around all of the recommendations. And I think with amount of detail that's lacking, it's very difficult to take a firm position one way or the other. So I think this does a fantastic job of providing that balance based on the information that is available. And based on that, I'm hoping, and I'm not sure if this would be an amendment to Trustee McKay's motion, but I would like to suggest that the committee consider actually attaching this report to our response to the funding model review because it provides far more detail than we would be able to provide staff through our discussion tonight.
Okay. Is that a formal amendment?
Well, through the chair, do we think that would require a formal amendment, or can we say that we would, are we okay with this, doing it in this approach?
As the mover, I think that would fall to you.
I'm looking for input from the committee on how to proceed. If that's how the committee would like to proceed, including that as an appendix, then my comment would also be that if there's submissions from any of our partner groups, that we would include those as an appendix to our letter as well, as feedback from our local district.
Okay.
As an option.
Okay. Trustee Higgins?
I think what might be good for a process here
I got you.
is to pass a motion about whether we decide we're going to support a submission, and then maybe have a discussion on what we should include and could attach and shouldn't attach and all those types of things. Because that way we can make, I think there might be overall support for one part, but maybe not another part, so then they don't get bogged down and tied together. So I would recommend voting on staying focused on the motion and then moving on to whether your suggestion is something that we add to it or not. That's what I would recommend.
Okay. Trustee Barron. And then Trustee O'Neill.
Yes, thank you through the chair. My thoughts were a while ago now, so I'm going to bring them back together. But based on what you were just saying, so now you're recommending that we stay on the motion and not talk about the details of it? Is that what the final thought was?
A motion on do we want to support putting in a feedback? I would say let's stay focused on that, and then after that, do we all agree that we should submit something? Yes or no? Then what?
Because I have a comment about the what.
Okay, well so it sounds like the motion
everybody else has already commented on the what though, so maybe if I could just give a comment.
Sure.
That would be great. Through the chair, thank you.
Sure.
So I agree, I believe it's important for us to submit something as a board. I think it's important. To Trustee Higginson's point around how it's challenging to identify whether we are not in support of something, it's just as challenging to identify if we are in support of something, as you recognize, when we don't have enough information. So my hesitancy, and again, this report is, thank you for taking the time to do it. It's very thorough, and I appreciate many of the comments that are made in here. I think that a report that we may tentatively attach to a submission to as our response in this, I feel that we should be not quite, I think all the points are important, but I don't think that we should be leaning so clear into staff support the recommendation overall, or my concern is that if we don't have all the information, how do we know if we support it or not? So can't we just say that? We don't have enough information to know whether we support this or not, and then perhaps word it a little differently, or these are some points that we've considered. Those are just my thoughts, that if we're going to say that we can't oppose something, we also can't say that we can't support it if we don't have enough information. And so in which case then perhaps we should be changing the layout of how we are submitting this to identify the fact that we don't have enough information, rather than trying to imply that we do. I can feel the big loss now.
No, not at all.
No. And I apologize, and just the final thought around that is that I think it is important for us to identify and request stakeholders to submit along with us. Absolutely. Whether they are in support of our final submission or not. Having something along with our stakeholders, I think, would be...
Absolutely. Yeah. So have I missed anybody in the last? Oh, Trustee O'Neill, sorry. I knew I'd missed somebody. Trustee O'Neill?
Yes, I can. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. First of all, I just make because I'm having a difficult time hearing, I need someone to read me the actual motion.
That the business committee recommend that the Board of Education of School District 68, Nanaimo Ladysmith, provide feedback on the funding model review to the Ministry of Education. Furthermore, that the letter state that the Board of Education has received input from our education partners.
Okay, thank you. And so we're dealing with the motion and not an amended motion that is to add supporting documents to that?
Not yet, yeah, correct.
Okay, sorry, and I'm still having difficulty hearing. So I just want to say that I am in support of sending that motion, but I also echo what I think Trustee Barron was expressing. And apologies because sort of everyone's pieces are cutting in and out, but essentially I think that we can take further time to actually go over some of these details with consideration of some of the other pieces that the stakeholders have raised in this meeting.
Okay, thank you. Trustee O'Neill, and then, McKay, I should say, and then Trustee Kelly.
I'd like to call the question on the motion.
Oh, that's okay. Okay. All right. All those in favor? Anybody opposed?
It's Trustee O'Neill.
Trustee O'Neill, are you in favor of the motion?
Yes.
Yes? Yeah, okay, you are.
Yes.
Okay. So the motion carries. So then the second issue becomes what feedback do we want to send? Because while speaking for myself before I take feedback from anybody else, because I didn't get a chance to speak before the question was called, I support the principle of sending in feedback. And I respect staff's thoughts on this. I have similar concerns to Trustee Barron. I would be very uncomfortable saying that I support some of these recommendations because I have some big concerns about a few of them, particularly as mentioned, I believe it was number 6 was the one that, was it number 6 or number 8 that had the potential for a prevalence model? At 6, thank you. Yeah, and because of experiences I've had and things that I've heard from other provinces that have ended up going to a prevalence model, that really makes me nervous. Trustee Higginson.
What have you heard?
Just that it ended up actually reducing a lot of services, and that kids ended up not getting some of, there were some kids falling through the cracks, basically. Yeah.
Well, could I recommend then that any feedback that we provide is not based on things we've heard, but could say before supporting this recommendation, we would need to understand why it was made. If they refer to other jurisdictions.
Yeah.
So what is the success rate in other jurisdictions? You could provide some specific questions that you have. I think it's important to understand those things before we make a yay or nay based on what we've heard happened elsewhere. And I also think it's important to review what our staff, what feels about it for our district.
For sure.
And I think that that's important information that we see.
Yeah. Trustee Barron?
Through the question.
Okay, and I'll get Trustee Barron first, just because I saw you first, and then Trustee Kelly.
Thank you. Through the chair. I agree with Trustee Higginson with her comments. I would lean towards having it state that we neither support or, what's the word I'm looking for?
Oppose.
Or oppose, thank you, the recommendation, rather than saying we don't support with clarification, because I feel like that would be leaning towards supporting. I think a neutral position would be, I'd be more in favor of a neutral position without the appropriate information.
Yeah. Yeah, I have, okay. Trustee Kelly.
I guess the first part's a question, if I may. So what was our timeline to provide feedback?
31st, I believe.
So second to that is, in order to move this forward, what does the committee think is the best approach? Because if we start getting into individual recommendations, we're not going home tonight. So that's what we want to do, that's okay, but we're not going home.
No. I'd like to go home tonight. Yeah. So, Trustee McKay.
My suggestion is that we write a letter that says that before the board can support or oppose any of the recommendations, we fundamentally agree with a funding model review for the entire province. These are the questions that are raised that are relevant to our district, and submit the attachment of our staff report. And then also ask our stakeholder partner groups to submit any submissions that they wish us to attach, so that we can say in the letter, these are the reflections of our stakeholder groups that we've consulted with, and we believe that their concerns or support of recommendations is valid, and submitted as an entire submission. But the letter essentially would state that these are the views of our district. We supported in principle a review, but it raises more questions than provides us with answers.
I second that motion.
That wasn't a motion, but okay.
I think Trustee McKay, her idea was great, and I think that's a good compromise between just sending the report and maybe it's tempering it a little bit with some uncertainty, because we do have some questions, and I think that would definitely, I would support that.
Do we have any other feedback or thoughts from anyone?
Can we just move that as a motion?
Could I just ask
I second that
a
motion.
clarifying question regarding recommendation 6, and I, excuse my ignorance, but am I reading this into saying that the supplement, the single, is based on medical testing that's been provided? Is that how they're wording that? Because am I wrong in thinking that it's extremely hard to get your child tested?
Yes.
Before they get into school, so it's that kind of, I don't know, that raises
yes,
a little red flag.
Was it Trustee McKay, were you going to say?
Nope, I was on the
Okay.
list.
Were you on this, Trustee?
No, other than just to remind all of us that it's a funding model, not a spending model.
True. So, I just want to make sure I'm going to summarize what I think I understand here. So, if we would submit feedback from our partner groups, plus what staff has written, but could we would alter what staff has submitted a little bit? Okay, no? Okay, I thought we said we...
Suggesting that.
Okay.
That was not my suggestion.
Okay, I thought that you were saying about we could take out just those opening lines about supporting recommendations, because that contradicts.
No, our letter will state that our board
Okay.
does not support or oppose any of the recommendations. However, this is the questions that's raised through our staff.
Okay.
And that is in Appendix A.
Okay.
And then if we have submissions from our stakeholder groups, we would refer and say, we've received these submissions from our stakeholder groups that we have in Appendix B and C.
Trustee Higginson.
I'm just going to be a little bit of a fly in the ointment here. I'm wondering if we have enough consensus around the table that we can say in our letter that we support a funding model review, and we support the direction of a funding model review, and we support the guiding principles, that were in the funding model review. Because my concern with a whole bunch of people submitting a bunch of stuff they don't like and not commenting on what they do like is that the baby will get thrown out with the bathwater, and the whole thing will go kibosh, and we'll be stuck with this current model, which we know is outdated and is supported by years of advocacy from BCSTA and other stakeholders across the province as well, including BCTF, to have a funding model review. So I would encourage us to, at least if we can agree on saying we support a funding model review, we support the direction of this, we support the guiding principles that were used. Just finding things that we do support, I think, is really important. And if there is a way for the trustees, perhaps between now and sometime soon, to look through some of the recommendations, because I think some of them, there are ones we can support. 3-year funding. Hi, who doesn't like that idea? So I think there are some that we could say, here are things we support and could be implemented quickly. I do think that's possible. And I encourage us to also find the good things, and also raise the concerns that we have.
Ms. Wood?
I would hope that if you are going to make a statement that you support the guiding principles, that there would be a caveat that it would also include a review to determine whether funding is adequate. And staff did mention that in the report, and I do agree with that part, that was never one of the mandates of the funding panel to determine whether funding was adequate, and we know that it's not.
I got in trouble first day for that.
Yeah, staff said it in the report.
It's in there. It's right in there.
My fear is that they're going to change the funding formula to a new review, and it won't be successful for that reason, where if you infuse more money into the system, it quite possibly could be a very successful transition to a new model.
No money is no good.
Yeah.
It may come down in a different direction. That's all it'll do.
Mr. Trustee McKay?
I support Trustee Higginson's suggestions for consensus purposes around the letter writing.
As would I if we included that, as we make it really clear about the line about making sure that it's as much an issue about adequate funding as anything, that we really stress that. Trustee Barron.
Question, is there a time frame that we need to have this letter written and recommendation put in? What's the deadline?
March 31st.
March 31st.
Am I correct in that? I think so. Which essentially means, because we have spring break, that we need to decide tonight, have our recommendation ready so that we can ratify it at our board meeting next week.
I don't know if it needs to be ratified in a board meeting.
Okay.
We can have some consensus on whether, or I think that's, we passed a motion that we agreed to, we don't need to agree to the wording of a letter.
Fair enough.
We can agree to that kind of informally. This was the important part.
Okay. Okay. All right. Is there anything else on the funding formula review? Or any of our partners have anything else they'd like to add before we?
Well, I'd like to ask, when should our submission be? Because I have made comments to many trustees, but I don't have a written submission in a form that I imagine you're looking for, so.
Okay.
So I need a deadline for that.
In response, I would ask that it come in for the board meeting next week if possible.
So prior to the board meeting?
Or at the board meeting.
At the board meeting, okay, thank you.
And then I have to now withdraw that piece because I can't sit on the committee and make that. And nor can my group, because then I might be influenced and I have to go in as non, so.
Okay. All right, thank you for that discussion. All right, we have no new business that I can see. Ms. Matthews, do you have any questions from the audience? No.
No audience.
Well, I got from maybe from Twitter or.
No questions.
No questions on
media.
May I have a motion to adjourn, please? Trustee Higginson and Trustee Barron. All in favor? And we're adjourned.